Sometimes people say hope doesn't have a lot of class. We're trying to bring it back. And I think that is a great movie. I love Rodney Dangerfield, and I get no respect. One of the reasons I love him, I'm going to be honest with you, he looks a lot like my dad. And so whenever I watch Rodney Dangerfield, I think that's what I'm going to be looking like one day. So I better be nice to the guy. But if you've never seen the movie, it's Back to School. He's a guy who's been a successful businessman, but he never graduated from high school. But he has a son who's a senior in high school. He's kind of a misfit. He's not fitting in. So Rodney Dangerfield decides to go back and get his senior year so he can get his diploma at the same time with his son. So it's a great father-son movie. But really, the reason I thought I wanted to use it was this idea of Rodney Dangerfield never getting any respect. If there's anybody in today's society that doesn't get respect, it's dads. I mean, if you've turned on your television lately, you know every sitcom portrays the dad as some kind of bumbling, stumbling, clueless idiot. And I'm not saying that we don't contribute to that stereotype sometimes. In fact, I was just had a chance to vacation with my family and my grandkids for a few days, and as we were sitting around talking the other night, we were reminiscing about some of the things that my kids find very funny in our life, and a lot of it has to do with me. That's really kind of odd. It's like I used to have a goatee, and you could tell what I had eaten all day by just looking at my goatee, my beard when I got home. The kids always thought that was funny. Oh, Dad, you had corn on the cob for lunch today, you know. So they thought that was kind of funny, and then they reminded me of the time that we were coming back from Myrtle Beach, and we stopped at south of the border at Pedro's. Don't act like you're so uppity. You've never been to Pedro's south of the border, all right? And we got that good chili dog, but then we bought some fireworks, right? And we had a big old fat firecrackers, and you know, they're illegal in North Carolina. Of course, we would never explode those things in North Carolina. And so before we crossed the border, I thought we've got to light at least one of these, right? And blow it up here before we head back across the state line. And of course, we're sitting in our Jeep Cherokee, and I light it, and Lars says, that's not a good idea. That's a fine idea. So I lit it, and I throw it, and once it hit the frame of the window, falls right back into the floorboard. And I got a pair of rubber sandals on, and I just, boom! And, you know, it just blew out the bottom of the sandal. It's funny how kids never forget those kinds of things. So some of us, we've kind of contributed. Or there was a time we went to the Outer Banks of the lighthouse, and everybody wanted to go and do all this stuff, and my knees are bad, and I don't like doing that stuff. But I noticed Mr. Park Ranger was giving a lecture under a shelter, and I thought, I'll just go sit in the back and listen to the lecture. And he's talking about animals in the sea, and I'm like, these are the stupidest adults I've ever heard in my life. He's like, what's a mammal? It lives in the water. It sounds like, you know, like that. And I'm like, well, that's got to be a dolphin, thank you, sir. And then he was talking about something that's got 8 legs and little suction cups, and you know, I'm like, that's an octopus. And I'm going, and finally I look, and here's Laura standing off to the side with Adam, and they got this look of horror on their faces. They said, what are you doing? I said, I'm just answering the question. She says, honey, there's like 20 kids sitting in the front on the ground. I'm pretty sure the questions are for the kids. I'm thinking, these are the stupidest adults I've ever seen in my life. Laura will not even walk with me the rest of the day. It's like, stay away from me. Don't get close to me. I don't want anybody to know I'm with you. Kids don't forget stuff like that. And so I'm not saying we don't contribute this, but you know, when it comes to dads, we all have one thing in common as we sit here this weekend, is we all had a dad who left a thumbprint on our life in some way that cannot be erased. And when some of you hear that, you cringe, because you had a dad that left a thumbprint on your life that you would do anything you could possibly do to have it removed. In fact, when you think about your dad, the word that comes to your mind might be angry. He was an angry man, or he was impatient, or he was irrational. Or maybe you had a dad, he wasn't dependable, or maybe he was unstable, or he was weak, or he was absent, or maybe he wasn't absent. Maybe he was very professional and he was serious about his career, and it was more of a formal distance. In other words, you don't know where he was, but wherever he wasn't where you were, and there never was a connect in your relationship. And so when you think about your dad, you think he didn't really have a positive influence on my life. Or maybe you're here this weekend and you would say, my dad had a very positive input, and the thumbprint he put on my life was a very good one. Maybe your dad was a man of integrity. Maybe you would say, my dad was a godly man. That's what describes him. Or he was dependable. Maybe you had the kind of dad that not only loved you, he knew how to show it 1,000 different ways. But this is what I'm going to ask you as we talk this weekend. Whatever kind of dad you have or had, I'm going to encourage you to cut him a little bit of slack this weekend, because I can promise you firsthand that the role of a dad is a difficult role to fill. And that probably explains, if you've been at Hope for a while, you've noticed that very rarely do I do Father's Day messages, and it's probably because personally this is one of those areas of my life where I wish I had the opportunity to sail away to the island of second chances. This is one where I really wish I could go back. Now that I know what I know, and I'm a little older and I'm a little wiser, I wish I could go back and do things differently. Of course, you can't do that. But it probably also explains that when Mother's Day rolls around and I I speak to moms. I tell you how great you are, and it's, love blossoms and cheer blossoms going all over the place, and the world would implode tomorrow if we didn't have moms. We couldn't live without you. But when it comes to dads, it's like a bunch of losers. We got to get our act together. We're sending the whole world to hell, and, a handbasket, And so I don't want to do that this weekend. So I drew up some guidelines to try to stay in as I talk to the men this weekend. And I want to give them to you. First of all, I want to encourage you, not discourage you. It would be very easy for me to spend the next few minutes talking about all of our shortcomings, all of our faults, all of our issues. After all, men, at times we are easy targets. But one of my goals this weekend is that you walk out of here, you leave not beaten down, but encouraged to be the man I know in your heart you really want to be. And God wants you to be. Second, I want to stand with you, not above you. I'm going to be talking about some areas that we all struggle with. The last thing I want to do is give you the impression that these are areas where you struggle and I don't struggle. These are struggles that I live with every day. These areas are just as real to me as they are to you. So I want to make sure you understand that I'm identifying with you. And then third, I want to challenge us not to just settle for how the media portrays us. It's easy to sometimes as dads to justify our shortcomings and justify our behavior. And, it's easy for us to say, well, at least I'm not as bad as that guy, because we can always find a dad who's a lousier dad than we are. And when we compare ourselves to him, maybe we look a little better. I don't want us to do that. I hope as we walk out of here, we can begin to raise the standard of fatherhood back to where we know it should be, and that we'll walk out of here determined that we're going to begin to shoot a little higher to be the men, the fathers that God created us to be. So those are my guidelines. And I'm going to do that by talking about 4 areas of temptation that I think we deal with on a daily basis. And I picked these because I think these are slippery slopes. And what I mean by that is these are, once you start down, it's just hard to stop. And so it's best just not even to get close to the edge, because once you begin to slide down, it's almost impossible to recover. And I was reminded of that a few years ago. When our first house, when we moved here, we had a full basement. You could walk in from the back, which means we had a level front yard, and then the house sloped down, the yard sloped down, and then it sloped through the backyard and sloped through the trees and down to a little basin, little gully back in the back. And we had just had a snow of maybe 4 or 5 inches, and then about a day later we had a rain. And then it turned to about 25 degrees. And so the rain froze on top of the snow, and it literally, my yard was like an ice rink. And we had this little Yorkie Terrier. I'm going to be honest with you. I hated that dog. Just like, yip, 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 all the time. A leaf would blow across the yard, and she'd be at the window, yip, 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 yip. And I'm like, I hate that dog. In fact, this is what I did with that dog. I pimped her out. I bred her, sold her puppies, took the family to Disney World, then came back and gave her away. That's how much I disliked that dog. But anyway, I had to take her out, and it's like 25 degrees, and I didn't put a jacket on. I just had a T-shirt, and I'm going to take her outside. And sure enough, you think she's got enough sense to go out in the front yard where it's level? No. She's got to go right around the side of the house. And she took one step on that slope, and she went right down the hill past the house, right through the backyard, through about 30 yards of trees, right down in that basin. And I'm like, great. I should just leave her there. But being the humanitarian I am and the lover of animals, I decided I can't do that. But I didn't want to fall too, so I went back in the garage, got my ski poles, because I had convinced myself that I could, by sticking my ski poles in the ice, get enough traction. I took one step, was on my rear end. I looked like Chevy Chase in Christmas Vacation. Down the slope, through the backyard, through the saplings, breaking them off into the basin. I got ice burns, and I am an absolute mess, and I'm so mad at this dog. And anyway, so I go pick her, and every time I try to walk back up, I can't. I just fall right on my face, and I'm like, I can't get out of this. I'm going to die. This is going to be my legacy. I'm going to die in my backyard. And I can see Laura. She's 3 stories up, basement, first floor, second. She's blowing her hair and putting on makeup, and I'm like, and totally oblivious that I'm dying, out there. So finally, after about 20 minutes, and I'd pick the dog up, and every time I'd fall, I'd drop her, and she'd get mad and run off and scared, and then I couldn't catch her, and then I'd catch her again. And finally, I found this one little place where maybe because of the bushes, the ice wasn't quite as hard, so I could jam my heel in and get a little traction, and then I'd hold the dog, and I'd pull myself up, and I'm pulling myself up, and I'd literally get to the top, and I am about to have a massive coronary. It's cold, I'm exhausted. I have to walk out the back of the yard, all the way around the block, come back down the street, and I walk in the front door. Laura's hair is all done, her makeup's all pretty. She said, you ready to go to the mall? And I'm like, with this little dog, right? Let me take care of this first. But every time I think about the slippery slopes we live on, that's the way temptation works. Sometimes just one step and you're gone. Here's the tragedy. It's that when we as dead, when we slip and fall down those slopes of temptation, this is what we got to understand. It impacts more than just us, because we always take others down with us. Now, with all that in mind, if you have your Bibles, let's look at James chapter 1. And as you're turning over to James chapter 1, I think it's interesting that James makes several references to men in just the first few verses of this chapter. He uses words like brethren and brothers and he and him and his and man and many and men. And in these first few verses, he begins by pointing out some circumstances that we may or may not find ourselves in at any given time. You get down to verse 5 and he says this, if any of you lacks wisdom. And I think we can relate to that. I'm pretty sure all of us have found ourselves in a situation where we just needed wisdom. We weren't sure what decision to make. And I'm not just talking about when we're lost and we're too prideful to ask for directions. I mean, we really find ourselves in a situation. Do I do this? Do I make this decision? Or do I make this decision? Do I buy or do I not buy? Do I choose this new job or do I stay with my old job? It's more secure. And we find ourselves in situations where we just need wisdom. What do we do? Well, the good news is, according to verse 5, James says that when we find ourselves in that scenario, we can ask God and he will give us that wisdom we need to make the right decision. So that's one situation. He talks about another situation in verse 6, and it has to do with doubt. And I think it's safe to say that as men, we've all found ourselves in circumstances where we struggled with doubt. And it's interesting, James says when we struggle with doubt, verse 6, he describes us as kind of being blown and tossed around by the winds of the sea. And any man that's worth his salt has watched Deadliest Catch. And you've seen those boats up at the Bering Sea. You know, they got those 15, 20, 30-foot swells. And you watch them. And I'm like, how in the world do people get on these boats and stay on these boats? But that's kind of what James says we're like when we're struggling with doubt. In fact, he says in verse 7, that man, the man struggling with doubt, should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all that he does. And I think we've all been there as men. We've been up, we've been down, we've been in, we've been out, we've been hot, we've been cold, we've been strong, we've been weak. There were times when we were great men of faith, but yet then there are times when we were great men of doubt. We've been double-minded. We can relate to that. And then he gives us another situation in verse 9. I think we can all relate to the humble brother in verse 9. I think most of us, if we've been married for any period of time, we've all been to that place in our lives where having less than $10 in the checkbook was kind of a way of life. Remember that? And you prayed that there were no unexpected expenses. You prayed the car didn't break down. You prayed that you didn't have a flat tire. You prayed that the kids didn't get sick because you knew that $5 either way could destroy your budget for the month. Maybe some of you are there right now. And then a few of us probably can identify with the wealthy man in verse 10. Maybe God has blessed you financially. He's blessed you with financial resources, and you know that it's God because deep down inside you know you're not smart enough to make all that money. And he says, hey, if God has blessed you and you're doing well financially, verse 10, he says, enjoy it while you have it. It may not last forever, so while you have it, enjoy it. My point is this. Most of us have been in and out of these situations in different times of our lives. However, now James moves to two situations that I think as men we find ourselves in all the time. In fact, these two situations are true of every man I've ever met. The first one's verse 12. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial. It seems as men we're always under some kind of trial. Maybe it relates to our marriage, maybe it relates to our career, maybe it relates to parenting, maybe it relates to our health, maybe it relates to our finances. But it seems like I've never met a man who says, I don't have any trials in my life. So I think we can relate to that. We always find ourselves in some kind of trial. And then the second situation I think we're always in is verse 13, when tempted. When tempted. I mean, as men, we're being tempted. Not just some of the time. Every day we deal with some kind of temptation. So as I look at this list in James chapter 1, it's not the wisdom area. It's not the doubting area. It's not are we poor, are we rich area. It's not even the trials of life area that I want to address. It's that temptation part. It's those potentially slippery slopes. And so over the next few minutes, I just want to identify those four slippery slopes, those four temptations that every man deals with. And I just say a word or two about how we can avoid them as we strive to be the men, the fathers that God has created us to be. You know the first one's coming, so let's just get it out of the way. The first one is that temptation to be unfaithful in your marriage, the temptation to have an affair. And I realize that when I speak to Hope, whether it's the Raleigh campus, the Holly Springs campus, I realize that I'm speaking primarily to Christian men. But don't tune me out because you've never had an affair. It's great if you've never had an affair, but you're probably a liar if you say you've never been tempted. And I can assure you, you're an idiot if you don't think you ever will be tempted. So let's just get rid of all the pride, all the facade. Let's look at what James has to say in verse 13. He says, when tempted, no one should ever say, God is tempting me. James says you should never get into a situation where you say, if God hadn't led me to this hotel, if God hadn't led me to this bar, If God hadn't have told my boss that I had to go on this trip, if God hadn't allowed my old high school sweetheart to find me on Facebook, this never would have happened. James says that argument doesn't hold water. Verse 13, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone, but each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. And I've talked about this before. The word entice, when you think about it, it really is a man's word. It's a word that's used in reference to a trapper when he's hunting. It's a word that's used in reference to a fisherman when he's casting a lure or a fly into a stream. Literally, this is the definition: to draw out by bait, to set a trap for the unsuspecting. It's this thought of being drawn out from a place of safety, and in the sense of what we're using it, we would say the place of safety is monogamy. So being enticed out of the place of safety to a place of danger. So it's the temptation to have an affair, the temptation to seek satisfaction outside of your marriage. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I've been this long enough to know that there's absolutely nothing I can say if this is what you've already decided you wanted to do. I've said in my office that I've talked to men who said this is a decision that I'm considering, and I've literally pointed out the ramifications. If you do this, this is the ramifications. And they walked right in my office and said, let me pray about it, right? And they've gone right ahead and did exactly what they wanted to do. So I know that nothing I'm going to say, but I will tell you what will help. It will help to have a plan and then master the plan. And I know as men, sometimes that's difficult for us. I'm going to give you a very simple plan, but it's a guaranteed plan that will keep you away from the slippery slope of having an affair. This is what it's called. It's called a picture of your family. I think every man ought to go home this weekend and get out his cell phone and take a picture of his wife, take a picture of his kids. And when you're traveling or when you're somewhere and you're tempted to be unfaithful, look at that picture of your family. And if you're with someone and she happens to be the one who's tempting you, go ahead and show her the picture and introduce them. That's my wife, and this is my two boys and my daughter. You know, just you know what will happen? Your family will become your guardian. Your family will become your protector. I have my family's picture on my phone. That picture reminds me. It reminds me of this. It reminds me that if I fall sexually, I'm going to have to look at two boys who are now grown men, and I'm going to have to explain to them why. And then I'm going to have to face their mother with a bayonet, who has described to me in very explicit terms what she would do with that bayonet, right? Here's the deal, guys. It looks so satisfying. It looks so familiar, but as we learned in our walking in the Spirit versus walking in the flesh, it leads to destruction and death every time. You know, you're on the straight life. Dobson says it's a straight life. You're paying the bills. You're raising the kids. You're going to work. You're coming home. You're paying the mortgage. And it seems so boring. And then someone winks at you or bats her eyes. And all of a sudden, how exciting it would be to get off the straight life. And so you get off the straight life. You leave your family. And you go up. And you know what happens? You marry her. And you get her family. And you get her kids. And you get her problems. And then you have your own kids. You know what happens? You're back on the straight life again. Paying the mortgage. Taking care of the kids. It never, ever satisfies. So a warning to all of you who are close to sliding down a slope you don't want to slide down. Wake up, back away from the slope. Because understand, if you slip, you take your family with you. They'll never be the same. Remember a few weeks ago I spoke on forgiveness, and we had the cross up here, and people here in Holly Springs, they went up and they nailed to the cross individuals that they were going to forgive. They weren't going to carry around that grudge and resentment anymore. And I didn't look at those things, but thousands of people nailed things to the cross that weekend. And a few weeks later, a girl came up to me. I was meeting guests afterwards. She's probably about 30 years old. And she said, I want to tell you how much that message meant to me, because my father, who I thought walked on water, after he died, suddenly, I found out he had been having an affair. She says, my image of him was shattered. But that weekend, I was able to nail my father to the cross and say I wasn't going to carry the grudge anymore. Here's the problem. The damage was done. Avoid the slippery slope. Proverbs 14:12 makes it very clear. There's a way that seems right to a man. It just seems logical. It seems so right. But Solomon says the end leads to death, destruction. Temptation number 2. It's the temptation to give our best to our careers and give our family the leftovers. And what's interesting is we're hanging around on this slope is that we kind of justify putting all of our energy into our jobs, putting all of our energy into our career, because we convinced ourselves we're doing this for our families. We're doing this to provide for our families. We're doing this so they'll have a better life than we had. And let me just say this. There's nothing wrong for wanting to provide for your family. Not only is that a wholesome idea, that's a biblical idea. 1 Timothy 5:8 says somebody who doesn't provide for their family, worse than an unbeliever. One translation says you don't provide for your family, worse than an infidel. I mean, that's quite a statement. So let me just say, it's commendable to want to provide for your family. It's commendable to want to make sure that there's food on the table. It's commendable to want to make sure that there's appropriate shelter. Here's the temptation. The temptation is to go to the extreme. And this is especially relevant of those of you who earn a good living, but you have the potential, you have the possibility of earning an even better living if you just spend a little bit more time, a few more hours, a little more effort. And you make that decision, you just justify it. Well, if I work longer and if I work harder, I'll be able to make an even greater contribution to my family. But the reality is this. Let's be real, guys. Let's be honest. For most men, the marketplace, our careers, our job, that's where we get our self-worth. And that's usually why we do what we do. But here's the challenge. We only have a limited amount of emotional energy. As men, we only have so much creativity. We only have so much zest for life. So this is what we have to decide every day. How and where am I going to spend it? Now, some of you guys are incredibly creative. You're incredibly innovative. Your enthusiasm blows me away. You get up early in the morning. You hit the floor running. You go out and jog before you take a shower. You hit the office before your family even rolls out of bed. And you're motivated. You approach your job. You approach your life with incredible energy. And then about maybe 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, you drag in under the front door and drop your briefcase and make your way to the easy chair and turn on Sports Center or get on the computer, and you are absolutely spent. And what you now have for your family is just leftovers. This came home to me just a few weeks ago. It was Mother's Day, actually. Laura asked me to go to the store to get a bag of ice. So I went to the store, got a bag of ice. As I was walking out, a woman was walking in who I knew from Hope. And I said, I didn't know you lived out this way. And she said, I don't. I'm just out taking a drive. And I could just tell by the way she said it on Mother's Day, this wasn't right? But I'm kind of one of those, I don't stick my nose where it's not invited. So I just kind of began. I took like 2 steps, and she said, hey, by the way, Mike, she says, next time you talk to men, tell them that it's not fair to be gone all week and do everything you want to do, and then when you come home, you spend all your time on the computer or playing video games. So for her, I'm throwing it out to you. You know what she's saying? You're home, but your family's getting the leftovers. Now, what does James have to say about that? Verse 16, do not be deceived. In other words, don't fall into the trap. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights. In other words, if you have a personal connection with God through Jesus Christ, if you're in Christ, as we saw in our last series, you've got it all. And if you've got it all, why look for anything else? If you've got it all in Christ, why continue to pursue everything else? The problem is, as I said, most of us men, we get our self-esteem. We don't get it from God, who I am in Christ. Most of us get our self-esteem in the marketplace. And that's why it's so hard for us when we're going through economic downturns the way we're going through now. When a man loses a job, it is devastating to us. And so because of that, it's so easy for us to just inch our way closer and closer and closer to this slippery slope because, we're driven. We're trying to find that fulfillment. We're trying to discover our self-worth. And I understand that temptation, especially as it relates to do I do this or do I work hard at being a dad? Because being a great dad doesn't include a lot of perks like really great dinners with your clients at really good restaurants or, conventions with all the boys. Or promotions where your peers look up to you, or incredible trips, Being a great dad doesn't make you feel as invaluable, maybe as important, but I want you to understand this. When it comes to being a dad, nothing can substitute for you. You are it. Your kids' coaches cannot fill that void. Your wife, who's working as hard as she cannot fill that void. You remember back in school when our regular teachers were sick? We loved it because we knew what was happening. Substitutes were coming. You remember that? Some of us, we're going to have a lot of explaining to do when we get to heaven for the way we treated substitutes when they showed up at school, right? But these poor substitutes, they came in, they did the best they could, but here's the deal. When it comes to your role as a dad, there's no substitute for you. What does that mean? It means that no matter how busy you are, no matter how much under demand you are, how important you are in your career, we have to make it a priority to carve out time so that we can enter the world that our child lives in. It really is about quality time, and I don't know how you can have quality time unless you have quantity of time. It's when your kid wants to go to Chuck E. Cheese You don't say, oh, you don't want to go to Chuck E. Cheese. You want to go to the driving range with Dad, and you want to watch Dad hit this brand new driver he's got. You're going to be really impressed. No, you come on and go to the driving range with Dad. That's what you really want to do. And like, I want to go to Chuck E. Cheese. No, we're going to have a really good time. In fact, I'm going to let you pick up some of the balls in a little while, so you just sit right over there and make sure you don't get hurt. It's not that. There's nothing wrong with teaching your kid to play golf or hunt or fish, whatever it is, but you got to enter into their world, because if you don't, can you see where they may grow up and look back and say, wow, now that I look back, I really wasn't that important to Dad. Now, I'm going to let you in on one more secret, and I've learned this from personal experience. Weekends will never make up for being busy every night of the week. And again, I know what I'm talking about when I say that, unfortunately. In fact, if I have any regret, and as much as I love this church, and as much as I am jazzed about the impact that it has, not just locally but around the world, if I have any regrets about starting this church, is that looking back, without a doubt, it took precedent over my family. Didn't mean for it to, but it did. And to be honest with you, my family paid an incredible price for what I had justified in my heart as doing the right thing. Stay away from that slippery slope. Avoid the temptation of expending all of your energy in places trying to get your self-worth and leaving the leftovers for your family. Here's the third one. You say, Mike, get to the third one. I'm not feeling that encouraged yet. Okay, let's get to the third one. It's that temptation to lecture instead of imparting life. It's that temptation to deliver the lecture instead of listening and learning and earning the right to be respected. You know, I've read this Bible seriously from cover to cover a lot of times. That lecture may work at work. It may work at the office. I can't find anywhere in the Bible where the home is an extension of the office. I can't find anywhere in the Bible where at home you're the boss and your wife and your kids are the employees. And I say that to tell you this. That means no one automatically respects you. You see, respect doesn't automatically come because you contributed sometime in the past to the conception of a child. Respect comes because you earn it. You have to work really hard at being respectable. Let's see what James has to say about this. Verse 19. My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Have you noticed as men we tend to flip that around? We come home, things aren't as planned, dinner's not ready, it's not on the table. What's the first reaction? Slow to speak? Are you kidding? Right? If you're anything like me, we immediately deliver the lecture, and then when we're through, we've got it all out of our system, then maybe we'll listen. We do exactly the opposite of what James encourages. We're quick to get mad, we're quick to lecture, we're quick to speak, we're slow to hear and slow to listen. Now, I've observed in my numerous lectures over the years, some of which were quite eloquent, I just want to say in my behalf, that when I would get everybody together and I would begin to lecture, everybody, they do get quiet. After all, I'm the loudest in the family. I'm paid to talk. They know that this is what I do. They're not going to argue with me. I mean, this is probably the one thing I'm good at. And I have a tendency to play to my strength and say, we're going to have a little family time. And I mean, I just have a come to Jesus meeting. And I notice when I do that, my family will actually get quiet. And not only that, it will even look, if I look them in the eye, it will look like they're paying attention and listening. But what I've learned over the years is they're not really listening. What they've done is they've tuned me out. And the reason they tuned me out is because since I wasn't really expending my energy into my family and I was only giving them the leftovers, well, I didn't have enough energy left to come in the door and discover the facts. Discover that maybe they had a bad day, or maybe the dog ran away, or maybe somebody wasn't feeling well, or maybe one of my boys had a bad day at school and was betrayed by a friend, and now there's a mom just trying to soothe that wound and keep it all together. I just want to know, why isn't my expectation being met? And so this is what I learned the hard way. I've learned that kids don't need our lectures. What they need for us to do is to impart life. You say, Mike, what do you mean by that, imparting life? Well, I can just give you a few examples of things that come to mind. When you impart life, you impart values. See, when you're imparting life to your children, you're really communicating to them, not through lectures, what's really important, what your priorities really are. You're really communicating, these are the things that really matter in life. But understand, it doesn't come from our lectures. It doesn't come from what we say. How do our kids learn it? How do we impart it? They learn it from watching us, from observing us. As they look at us, they discover quickly They're very perceptive, what's really important to us. You see, dads, we can talk about spirituality and being Christians and doing the right things, but then every weekend when church comes around and we have an excuse as to why we don't want to go, our kids begin to say, maybe dad's not really that serious about spiritual things. He talks a good game. Or, they hear you call in and you're not feeling well, so you're going to take a sick day, and then an hour later they see you with your golf clubs over your shoulder, getting in the car, heading out, and they're like, Dad talks a lot about honesty and integrity, but I'm not sensing that he really lives honesty and integrity. That'd be one way, values. Second, when you impart life, you impart the ability to make a decision and stick with it. My dad was here last service, and I got to tell you one thing about my dad. When he gave you his word, it was his word. It was etched in stone, But I wonder how many times we give our word, we say something, but we don't follow through. How many promises have we made to our kid? When I get home, this weekend, next Friday, and then we always have an excuse why we can't follow through. It's the ability to make a decision and stick with it. And then while you're imparting life, I think another one is a good one, maybe would be a sense of humor. I mean, it just amazes me how grumpy we are as dads. How foul we can be as dads. We walk in, eat your peas, sit up straight, get off the phone. You smell bad. You never look at your room. And it's like, oh, man, And I often think, we ought to try staying home all day for a week with the kids. We would come up with 1,000 ways to get back into that concrete jungle. But we come home at the end of the day, it's like the missing link walking through the door. Snorting and growling and hissing and yelling and snapping. And mom's like, stay away from him. Don't make eye contact. Let me feed him. He'll be okay. Just give him his newspaper. Just go to your room. Just back off, right? Don't you think maybe it's time we put our big boy panties on and just grow up? Seriously. Let me just ask you a question. When's the last time your family really heard you laugh? Just laugh. One of the goals for my family is that the most familiar sound they hear is laughter. And when we get together, it's like a nut house. We laugh constantly. And not just with our kids, even our grandkids. We kept them overnight, and I was taking them home today, and I got Olivia, she's 2.5, and Brendan, he's about 14 months, and they're in the back seat. And man, it was like a God thing. A Freebird came on, 100.7, And somebody asked me one time, they said, why don't you listen to K-Love? I'm like, they don't play Freebird. So they're playing Freebird, and they're just tearing it up. And I got it cranked up now. I just got it cranked up, and I got the subs up, and it's boom, boom. And I look at the kids, and their eyes are full of fear. And I'm like, come on, guys, let's dance. And, so I'm driving, and we got the head bobbing. And I look at Brendan. He's looking at me at the corner of his eye going, like, I think Grandpa's crazy, but I'm going to do it, And I can see him in the rearview mirror, and then I can see him, and I say, come on, let's get the white man dance going a little bit. Who had the white man dance going, and he can't do that, but I see his little arm going something like this. And then we finally pull up at a stoplight, and it's like, oh, they're tearing it up at the end. I say, come on, guys, let's go crazy. And Olivia's got her hands up, and Brenda's got his hands up, and I look, and there's a woman sitting beside me going. But she can't see the kids in the back because my windows are blacked out, right? I hope she doesn't go to Hope. You say, Mike, why is that important? Because if nothing else, you know what it teaches our kids? It teaches our kids that life can be tough, but you can live above the grind and above the stress of it all. Impart life, not just words. And here's the fourth temptation. It's the temptation to underestimate the importance of cultivating your family's spiritual appetite. Men, it's our jobs, whether we like it or not, to cultivate the spiritual appetite of our family. Here's the problem in our macho society. It seems like it's always mom's job to answer the religious questions. You're out in the garage working on your lawnmower or your car, and your kid comes out and says, Dad, I'm having a problem at school. My friend betrays me, and I'm thinking about poisoning him when I get to school on Monday. What do you think I should do about that? Oh, go talk to your mom. She's the one big on church. She'll tell you what to do, No, dads, it's our job to create that thirst in the lives of our children so that, as Jesus said, they hunger after righteousness. Whenever I do a parent-child dedication, I always use the words of Solomon in Proverbs 22:6. He says, train up a child. That word train up, it's Hebrew. It literally means palate. It's referring to the roof of the mouth, the gum of the area. And it was used with the Hebrew women. The midwives would take the babies, and they would dip their fingers down into some date or some olive juice, and they would rub and massage the baby's gums right after birth, and that would create a sucking sensation, a sucking motion. And then the midwife would give the baby to the mom to nurse. What did she do? She created a thirst. That was her job, to create the thirst. It's part of training. Not forcing, creating a thirst. Not demanding, creating a thirst. And I'm just going to be honest with you. If you have to force your children to come to church, there's something wrong with your training. you're not creating a thirst. What you're creating is force. Don't underestimate the importance of cultivating your family's spiritual appetite. Well, there you are. Happy Father's Day. Don't you feel encouraged? I really tried. Don't clap. This is why I don't do this stuff. We'll do another one in 10 years. You want to know how you scored? Ask your wife. You say, are you kidding? She would nail me to the wall. Nah. I have a feeling that if you went home and said, honey, honestly, how am I really doing? I have a feeling she won't take advantage of you. In fact, if she's a godly woman, she'll very graciously help you identify. Laura and I, we were at Disney World with the kids, and they left, and we stayed one more day just to have a day to ourselves. And we were walking around Epcot, and she could tell that last day I was back into reentry because my mind was already back at work, and I was thinking about my message, and she said, why do you struggle with these so much? And I'm telling her why I hate doing Father's Day messages. And she said, well, what do you think you're talking about? And I would tell her, and she said, yeah, you weren't good at that. And but here's what she'd say, but you know what, honey? You've gotten better. You've gotten better. And I'd tell her about another, and yeah, you weren't very good at that either, but you're getting better. And here's what she said. She said, honey, let's face it. We were kids. We didn't know anything. We did the best we could. We keep learning, and God in His grace fills in the gaps. Here's the deal, guys. We may not be perfect, but we can be better. By God's grace, we can be better. As we walk in the Spirit, you say, I can't do it, Mike, I've tried. You know why? It's because you're trying. It goes back to walking in the Spirit as the power of God. Say, God, I can't do this, but I'm going to I'm going to try to be a better father tomorrow. I'm going to try to be a better husband, a better man, a man of integrity. And God, you know where my struggles are, so you're going to have to live this through me. We have to give God the opportunity to do that. I wish I could do all this stuff I sit up here and talk about. So does my family. But Bob Benson's written a little book entitled Laughter in the Walls, and I just want to read it as I close. Kind of puts it all in perspective. He says, I pass a lot of houses on my way home, some pretty, some expensive, some inviting. My heart always skips a beat when I turn down the road and see my house nestled up against the hill. I guess I'm especially proud of the house and the way it looks because I drew the plans myself. Started out large enough for us. I even had a study. Two teenage boys now reside there. It had a guest room. My girl and 9 dolls are permanent guests. I had a small room Peg had hoped would be her sewing room. The 2 boys swinging on the Dutch doors have claimed this room as their own. So it really doesn't look right now as if I'm much of an architect, but it will get larger again. One by one, they will go away to work, to college, to service, to their own homes. And then there will be room, a guest room, a study, a sewing room, just the 2 of us. But it won't be empty. Every corner, every room, every nick in the coffee table will be crowded with memories. Memories of picnics and parties and Christmases and bedside vigils and summers and fires and winters and going barefoot and leaving for vacation and cats and conversations and black eyes and graduations and first dates and ball games and arguments and washing dishes and bicycles and dogs and boat rides and getting home from vacation and meals and rabbits and 1,000 other things that fill the lives of all those who would raise 5. And Peg and I will sit quietly by the fire and listen to the laughter in the walls. Maybe that's our goal. Maybe that's our goal. Is to one day be able to sit back and say, you know what? Wasn't perfect. Didn't knock it out of the park every time. But you know what? They knew I was there. And not only did they know I was there, they'll never be able to question my love and commitment. I mean, let's just work at being what God has called us to do. And be who He's created us to be. We'll let Him fill in the gaps. Father, thank you for letting us be here this weekend. And as we're reminded as men, we are called to an incredibly high calling. And that through your Spirit, you give us all the grace, the knowledge, as we saw in James chapter 1, verse 5, even the wisdom to be the man, to be the dad that you've created us to be. May we call on your wisdom, and we depend on your grace. We rely on your strength. Work through us, live through us. Father, I would even ask just miraculously that through your grace you heal the wounds that have been created by maybe bad parenting in our lives, and do the restoration that only you can do through your Spirit. I pray for those who this weekend, they don't have a positive memory of their father. I pray that you would remind all of us when we tend to be angry and carry a grudge that it's only by your grace that each of us aren't more screwed up than we are. And we thank you for that. In your name we pray.